The Game Boy Advance is 20 years old, and that fact is making me feel a little old since it was my first video game console. It was a significant upgrade from the original Game Boy, with its 32-bit processor and a larger screen. The Game Boy was always famous for being graphically behind the times, but way more popular than its competitors. But now, the GBA was on par. Here's 5 things you need to know about the Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy was a game changer. It wasn't the first handheld console, but together with the Color sold over 100 million units, prompting a new focus on creating games for handheld devices. The most popular title was Tetris, prompting more people to get into games in general. So when creating the Game Boy Advance, it was a no-brainer to them that it should be able to run all of these old games. Sure, the cartridge would look a little silly sticking out, but according to the handheld's chief designer, it was a duty for console developers to let fans play all the games up until now. It was a bit of a pain to get it working, but it was worth it in the end. Kinda wish more people at Nintendo today held the same philosophy. Today, most handheld games are played on phones, but the Game Boy Advance wasn't too far off of having that same kind of feeling. While the original Game Boy was a vertical console, the screen was square, but for the Advance, they were hoping to make it a bit larger while keeping it narrow. So some concepts had a vertical screen, much like how we play games today on phones. But in the end, due to trying to keep it small, they created a horizontal console instead. It's worth remembering that consumer electronics aren't a good way of gauging what was technologically capable at the time. A good example is the fact that the Game Boy never needed a monochrome screen. Its creator Gunpei Yokoi just wanted it that way. And similarly, the Game Boy Advance team were restricted in only using parts that would keep the price low. Low enough for kids to realistically be able to save up and get it in fact. So while the PSP was able to stuff itself with features later in 2005, the Game Boy Advance was made specifically so that it could be purchased at $100, and that millions could be produced and sent around the world. The GBA released at a weird time for tech and games. In the early 2000s, everything was going 3D, and there was a lot of excitement for what sort of visuals games could create. Technically, the Game Boy Advance could have rendered 3D graphics, but like I mentioned before, it would have been too expensive and also would have drained the battery way too fast. So the Game Boy's tech and developers' enthusiasm for 3D images created a new push for simulated 3D through 2D imagery. It's something that was popular on the SNES, but we got to see the creativity of seeing developers create the feeling of 3D worlds with 2D pixels all over again on handheld screens. There really isn't much of a market for this kind of style anymore, but it's still impressive today. The Game Boy was a massive success, and it was one that was initially prompted by Nintendo and other Japanese software developers. But as its overseas success accelerated, so did the amount of developers wanting to create games for it. By the time the Game Boy Advance was being created, excitement was at a fever pitch, and so Nintendo ended up sending out over 1,000 development kits to teams all around the world. So this time it wasn't just Japanese games being launched with the handheld, but also stuff like Rayman Advance and a version of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 as well. They also collaborated more closely with the US branch to make the console's launch a success overseas as well. Thanks for watching OTAQUEST in Japan. Feel free to subscribe to find out more about the art and creation of Japanese pop culture.